So, I just got back from my first day having played the new release, Shadow in the Ice. Wanted to take some time today to let you guys know what you might be missing out on and my first impressions of what I've experienced. So, let's jump in. First of all, let's be clear, this is a pretty typical patch. As far as the Living World Season 3 and then Living World Season 4 releases have been going, this one's about par for the course. That's obviously some salient information to a lot of us now, considering there's no expansion as we know it on the horizon. These patches kind of are Guild Wars 2 as it is right now, and that really means something. So the story was about the typical length. I kind of rushed it this time, honestly, really zerged it. I tried to take my time usually. Some of the recent Living World episodes, like towards the end of the last season, took me up to 7 hours to beat. But for this one, I really was bang on right in that middle zone of 2 hours, which is kind of a joke that I think is an exaggeration for most patches. But this one, really, that was exactly when I ended. I looked at the clock and it's 2 hours in and we were done. So the story length is about there. There's a lot more I can say about the quality. Now, I'll dedicate my own video that can have spoilers and describe what actually happened in the patch later to this. But I would say of the quality of the story, it's typical of recent patches. Now, you have to understand my perspective, and I will argue this till I'm blue in the face, is that the story quality has improved. It might be that you still feel no connection to certain characters. It might be that the general principle of fighting Elder Dragons is getting a little bit old to you at this point. But the devs do consistently push the envelope with the story quality, with the kind of camera work that they do, with the voice acting, with the environments and visual effects we get. They really have been stepping up and up. I would say, especially since the Thunderhead patch at the end of the last season or before the end of the last season. They do a lot of really cool things, and this patch continues that trend. So there are nice things to see, there are these big moments, and as far as I'm into the story right now, I really like the developments that are going on there, but we'll leave the spoiler stuff aside for now. So yes, a typical release. That is not necessarily a negative thing to me when I have got a pretty high opinion of the quality of the storytelling, and that they seem to be pushing it at least a bit each new episode. All that said, what else was typical about the release? Well, it's just like the prologue, it's just like episode 1, in that there was no fractal adjoining this, there's no raid that's adjoining this, the login screen hasn't changed, the little Path of Fire banner when you accept the thing hasn't necessarily changed. These are all there's no elite specializations. These are all things that I would consider to make this saga something new than just a season. These are things I would consider to make it expansion-like. And if you didn't think that the saga was expansion-like before, then I certainly don't think you will after this patch, and that's a bit of a shame. Let's talk a bit more specific. The open world was actually pretty damn good. They pretty much doubled the size of the Bureau Marches, which is a hefty amount of playable space now. You can see why they wouldn't do a third patch expanding the same map again, because it's kind of already pushing the limits. If anything, I feel like the new section of the Bureau Marches has actually been bigger than the previous one, but that might just be because of the kind of content they have in there and the amount of crazy mount movement and flying they had to do, particularly with some light puzzles I'll talk about later. Just like with the original half of the Bureau Marches, which, by the way, as they announced on the streams, were updated too, so it kind of feels like you get a double whammy to a certain extent. You do also have that very fast looping event setup. If you remember in the first half, when an event finished or a meta, it would cycle real quick again, and then you could go again. Well, they're doing that here. I thought that was efficient last release, and I think it's efficient this one also. The devs put the content in the game, and people miss it because the event's not currently going on. Well, increase the timers. I know it's a little bit less immersive, but it works for me. In particular, around on the open world, you do find shrines to the lost spirits of the wild, and they have really cool events. The main story actually requires you to come to these places and do them. So in that way, it's kind of like how Season 3 had us moving to Hearts. But they're very fun. One, for example, is a copse of horror-looking trees that the routes through them changes dynamically as the event progresses. It's basically, imagine the Swampland Fractal, that opening section where you have to puzzle your way through moving plants that might close off doorways. It's that experience in the open world. And it's pretty fun. You got to basically carry stuff into the center. You can kind of abuse it with teleports. There's a hiding in stealth, basically, near lights. The horror vibe and the creepiness really wasn't amped up from the first half, but you can feel it at least here in this forested area. They have a lot to do with forests, too. They got some cool events where you're cutting down trees, and we've actually seen animations for trees falling over since launch, you know, if you just gather a tree. And we've even seen some very rare events since launch where you could physically attack trees and destroy them like destructible terrain. But these events are all about that. And supposedly there was an Easter egg that slowly got filtered into the patch last episode, where you could follow mysterious members of Vigil out into the woods and they'd turn into trees. Well, that goes even further on this. You got these kind of weird, creepy events where you're attacking bushes and stuff. I spent a good amount of time doing that, but the novelty never really wore off, and it felt like a fresh kind of take on a dynamic event. There's another event where you get to turn into a cow, a bit like those really cool events way back at launch from Diessa Plateau, and you're pulling like these stones. It seemed a little bit buggy, but there's some cool physics going on there with ropes. And finally, a shrine with a big windy maze that you've got to run through using the new sliding physics and stuff that they've been doing with the combat more recently. So yeah, I would say the open world stuff is actually pretty entertaining and seems well balanced in terms of the rewards there now. The new tier of gear you need actually does take a good amount of Eternal Ice, and many of us are flush with it because the previous map was so forgiving, so that's nice. There's some good new rewards. There's actually a fishing rod you can get as a staff now. No, it's not proper fishing, but maybe one day we'll see they do something with that. You can at least run around now with one and attack people. Kind of want to be a daredevil utilizing that. And other fun little rewards are sprinkled about in a nice enough way for me. What's especially important is the way that they handled achievements. Last episode, the achievements were pathetic. As someone who actually enjoys playing the game and wants to spend time doing things and feeling like there's meaning there, it kind of sucked to have all the achievements suddenly thrown at me except one where I had to repeat the meta several times. It was really boring and didn't last long. These achievements actually require you to put a bit more effort in over more than just 2 days, and I actually feel like I'll be able to get a satisfying amount of time out of the map. What's even nicer is that because it's the same map, just expanded, it kind of picks up some of the slack from last episode, and I'm looking forward to that. There's something like 37 achievements, and after my first day, I've only got like 11 or 12 of them done, and none of those are really the harder, the more long-term ones. I will say one of the duds in the new map was this strange new mechanic they added where some events you get a bonus trial, and then you complete the trial, and then if people are successful at the supposedly harder thing, a harder sequel to the dynamic event will spawn. Now, I don't know whether this interacts with the meta in any fun way, and maybe it does, and this is where it really comes to shine. But this mechanic seems really pointless to me. I've experienced just a little bit of it, but it basically just means you get another event where some champions spawn, and you kill the champions, and there you go, you're done. Maybe when it comes to getting loot from champions and people being excited by that, it's fun. But to me, it felt like probably a lot of wasted time. The game doesn't feel very different. It just feels like Guild Wars 2 with dynamic events and sometimes another dynamic event, and maybe sometimes a slightly different take on a dynamic event because there's a bonus objective there. But none of it is really anything I'd notice, something that the devs was significantly going for if I hadn't heard about it on their streams before. Just seems like they could have stuck with the regular old format to me. And so I just mentioned it there, the meta. In this video, I'd love to actually talk about it, but I haven't really played the meta just yet. Seen little bits, heard little bits about it. It does seem to be very dense. So this meta is where you fight a new world boss, Drakkar. You'll remember at the announcement, the devs said that they were aiming for it to be a little bit reminiscent of the Triple Trouble encounter or the original overhaul to Tequatl. If you guys don't know what those are, they were big patches that are kind of precursor to raids, like really challenging content, but instead of it being hidden away to a niche audience, the idea was to have them out there in the open world. And the devs played with it. Those two releases are some of my favorite releases of all time with Guild Wars 2. And so obviously, I'm excited to get in and play Drakkar, but it really looks like, no, this isn't anywhere near those two patches. I hate that I can hear myself saying this into the video right now, because honestly, I should have seen it coming. It doesn't sound like they really pushed the difficulty. Rather than it being like Triple Trouble or the tech rework and really galvanizing a lot of people and being very exciting and, oh, who's going to get world first and all that kind of stuff, it seems like it's closer maybe to Heart of Thorn's Chuck Gerrant on release, which was hard, but people kind of had figured out pretty quick. Or much more recently, for a more contemporary example, the Death Branded Shatterer in the middle of last season. If you think about the Death Branded Shatterer, it's a world boss that will be killed if people are around, and particularly near reset when there's tons of players and people specifically go for it. But if you are at a random time of day on your own, it's very unlikely you'll beat the Death Branded Shatterer. It seems like Drakkar might be a bit like that. I will hand it to the devs though, there is a new achievement section, not within the story journal or stuff to do with the current patch, but just under general achievements for Drakkar. And that matches up with the fact that there's general achievements for Triple Trouble, and there's general achievements for the Shatterer rework, and there's general achievements for the tech stuff, I think, as well, isn't there? So they did at least put a whole bunch of stuff into this fight. It's very layered, it looks like there's a lot of stuff to work on, but it's not as compelling as I was hoping as far as the gameplay was concerned. So yeah, those are just my first impressions, and I'd really like to get in there and play a lot more of it so I can talk to you guys more accurately about it. Keep an eye on the channel for that as we go forward, or leave your comments down below. I'd love to hear, honestly, especially anything positive about that meta. I want to love it. So another thing about the map that I actually really enjoyed, I think some people might find a bit obnoxious, but is the new Raven Gate and light puzzle thing. Basically, one of the new masteries allows you to gain access to these mini dungeons. I mean, I really would say that jumping puzzle mini dungeons, they're not really combat oriented, but there's a lot of climbing around to do in them. Nothing really broken like the Chalice of Tears or super difficult like the Tribulation mode, but kind of simple, easy breezy, Guild Wars vanilla feeling jumping puzzles that many of us have got used to, but hopefully new players, which the game needs, are going to have a lot of fun in here. You basically get to climb around in these cool chambers, surrounded by ice often, and trigger lights. That's actually the majority of the footage that you will have been watching in the background. I really enjoyed doing these. There's one in a tower, there's one in a room filled with like transparent ice that you can look through. The graphics and the kind of shaders that they were talking about on the stream that have been applied on this patch really does make it very pretty. You'd think just because we're around white ice everywhere it looks rubbish, but no, they got a lot of color in there. They're really fun places to explore, and there's like 3 or 4 of them. Then, at the end of the day, they are just light puzzles, the same as we had in the last patch that you guys might be a bit sick of. So I can understand if some people aren't too thrilled. Particularly, 2 of the new light puzzles aren't in these mini dungeons. They're just out and about in the world. And one of them is insanely long. Like, ridiculously long. Like, it will take you on a tour through the skies, miles in the air. How you can do it without a griffin or a sky scale, I have no idea. The experience would be incredible. Where you are traveling for ages and ages and ages around all these mountain peaks. Not just in the new half of the map, but eventually back in the original half of the map. It's going to take you from the furthest reaches way back high in the sky, back where you entered. And it's so absurdly long, I actually found myself loving it again. Even if it did seem to kind of bug and I ran out of lights and I had to return and then come back, and they seem a bit iffy and fragile in that way. But I actually really liked that. Surprisingly, the light puzzles in this patch were something I got a lot of joy out of. Apparently, one of the achievements is to do all of them 3 times or something, and I get that that will probably be boring for people eventually, but as a first-time experience, they're well worthwhile, and what I spent a good amount of time yesterday actually doing. So let's talk about the masteries. You do want a mastery to get into these locations. I have openly criticized the game for making the new masteries feel even more worthless, since you don't actually have to get them. Other people can have them and then carry you through the map. What's kind of cool though is it really feels like in Icebrood Saga, the amount of experience you need to level the masters is actually a relevant thing to me. Obviously, you can't level the masteries anywhere except those maps, so Grothmar or this one. And I can actually feel it. I can actually travel for reasonable amounts of playtime in the map and still not have my masteries done. In fact, look at the footage right now. I don't even think I have my first one trained here, which is brilliant. Not only that, but the points mechanic as well. They've upgraded a lot of the masteries, obviously, and that means we're actually spending a lot of points this patch. And that means you actually have to go and gather a lot of the points. I have to say, guys, for the first time ever in Guild Wars 2, except very minor moments at the launch of POF and the launch of Heart of Thorns, I really am feeling the mastery system, and I'm much more positive about it with the way that they're doing it in Icebrood Saga, since I'm actually interacting with it than I ever have been before. So I'm really happy with that. The perks for the masteries themselves, though, I have to say, really aren't that exciting to me. Though it has been cool to not been able to open a gate and have someone else run over and open it for me. Like, that's one of those little social situations that I feel like Guild Wars 2 needs so much of. And as heavily as I criticized it before, I think I was probably wrong to, because I actually have liked that for now. The thing with being able to open the chests even when you don't have the mastery, though, I stand by. I think that's a bit silly. That leads me nicely over to Grothmar as well. Another criticism, just what, a couple of days ago I pointed out about Living World, is that when the devs add new episodes, they don't look enough at earlier stuff. So we're obviously in the Bureau Marches now, so what, we'll never look at Grothmar again? Well, for this patch, ArenaNet actually went back there and added some meaningful stuff. There are 3 mastery points you can get. 2 of them are just communes that, you know, one's in the jumping puzzle, one's on one of the spires. They take you to sort of vaguely new areas of the map, but aren't very big deal. But one of the other ones is a full-on new achievement in the Grothmar section, for what it's worth, to actually go around beating some events that you might have missed. Like, I had to kill a champion parasite devourer, and you have to clear the area of certain threats that you might not have otherwise done in the release before. And now there's actually incentive to do that. So that's fantastic, and I cannot applaud ArenaNet enough for that. More of that, please. If every episode of Icebrood Saga adds a little something back to those earlier maps, I'll be so happy. Honestly, release day for this, I saw loads of people in the new map, and when I went back to Grothmar, I saw loads of people back in Grothmar too, because they now had new meaningful content to do there. And if someone were to say, should I pick up Guild Wars 2 Icebrood Saga, I'll say, yeah, do you know what? People are generally filtered around quite well, because the devs are looking at all these releases as they come out. So I was really, really happy to see that. That's most of the patch as far as I've taken it for now, guys. You can let me know if I've missed anything. If you go over to the subreddit, you'll see that most people are obsessed with laughing at this Pegasus, like half horse, half unicorn, half griffin abomination that you can pick up as a new mount skin. But I don't really care that much about the mount skins. I don't really care that much about the gem stores. So if you want to have a laugh about that, that certainly was a thing in the patch. Juggling all of this with the Lunar New Year as someone who actually wants to get all the Lunar New Year skins that were just updated was pretty fun for me too as well. And that's about it. The only other thing I'm not sure about is we did see that weird unlisted trailer from ArenaNet about a new type of cosmetic, a new reward that seemed to stealth you or something. And I don't know whether that's in the patch or whether it's around. Maybe a super rare drop from Jakar? You guys will have to let me know. So that's it. Thanks very much for watching. I'll be back tomorrow where hopefully you'll see a really good long story playthrough of mine, and we can get to grips with all the badass new stuff that happened there. Can't wait to spoil it for you all. See you soon.